Okay, welcome to the LTS Node.js LTS community meeting, March 13th, 2017. So far we have present myself, Michael Dawson, Miles Borens, James Snell, Jeremiah Sampieko, and as an observer, Gibson Fanchuk. In terms of our agenda, it's in the work item. We have four things to go through. So potential list of Semver minor backports, talking about the time frame for active LTS versus maintenance, talking about managing floating gate patches, and talking about a backporting work group. Is there any other things that people want to add on to the agenda before we jump into those?
I'll just add that potential Semver minor backport PR that we have actually has already been done. I should just close that one for now. We do need to open a new one in the near future. There's a couple PRs that are open for backporting, but we're still, we're not super close to doing a minor, so I think we can push that to the next meeting.
Yeah, there are a few that we were looking to see where they were tracking, just
okay. So if you
were going to go in.
So if you've got particular ones in mind, then let's still follow up with that.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe we can just go through that list the ones that I have on the list here, and we can see if anybody has concerns.
Are we talking about a new list? Because there was still one issue on the previous list that wasn't ever marked off. That was backporting,
the
I guess.
crypto one, right?
Yeah, to both 4 and 6. Is that?
Those were done, I believe.
So are we talking about a new issue now?
Yeah, that was actually just I didn't clean that up. So those two, okay. The crypto stuff, I'm checking it off. Those landed in 4.8 and 6.10. There are a couple pull requests that have been opened since then for minors, but right. I don't see us doing another minor for a couple months.
Yeah.
So these have already landed and the minor has gone out, or they're landed waiting for the next minor?
They've landed and the minor went out about 2 weeks ago. Or 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Okay, so Gibson, the ones that were on our list to ask about, were they all in that list, or were there some that were?
I think they're probably newer. I think these ones look like they were the slightly older ones, given that they went out 2 weeks ago, right?
Okay, so we need a newer, so need to create newer lists. I guess, Gibson, we should just make sure that we create that, make sure the ones we're interested are on that list, right?
Yep. I think the two main ones were the FIPS fix and the zlib update.
Right.
We should probably also use it as a place to collect any other links to any other pull requests that other people are making for backporting minors to those branches, so that we can keep track of it in one spot.
That works for me.
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay, because like the FIPS one, certainly that one we did break something, and it basically just gets us back to, well, it partially unbreaks it, I think. So I don't know if we're going to want to wait 3 months for that one, but anyway, we can make the list and talk about it in the next meeting.
Yep.
Okay. So that was actually our first agenda item. So I just took a few notes on that front. So the next agenda item was, should we consider swapping the timeframes for active and maintenance?
So that's an issue that I brought up a little while ago, specifically around the idea of, right now we have an 18-month active and a 12-month maintenance. I do think that the extra 6-month overlap between the two was good to have as a means of keeping the delta between the two lower if possible. So I, for one, am at this point, even though it's extra work, it wasn't that much extra work, and I'm up for keeping things where they're at.
And it's worth noting that we've had some recent feedback on Twitter conversations that a certain subset of our ecosystem would like our LTS cycle to be longer, or active LTS cycle to be longer. Obviously, that begs the question about whether whether there's going to be people to actually step up and help maintain branches for longer. They were actually asking for maybe a 5-year active LTS cycle.
Right.
Who was asking for that, or like, was that like a longer thread, or was it just like one or two individuals?
It was 1 or 2 individuals. That came out of the Frost conversation the other day.
Were these individuals at larger enterprises, or was this community members?
Community members, module developers.
Interesting.
Question: why do you specify active LTS there? Is there a reason, or do you mean maintenance?
Active LTS. We're actively backporting issues as opposed to just doing security.
Yeah, maybe should have just said for swapping active and maintenance. Like in the LTS cycle, there's the active period and the maintenance period. The first one's 18, the second one's 12, right? And I think it was considering switching them to be, instead of 18-12, to be 12-18, right?
The issue, yeah. I meant what we were talking about right now.
Yeah, in the feedback, the community feedback, they were saying that it should be 5 years active LTS. There's only a couple of individuals that were saying that, but it's worth noting we probably don't want to shorten our active LTS cycle right now, given that we have that kind of community feedback.
So I'm taking a look at this right now and seeing the individual who posted this. So they were stating 5 years as a comparison to the Ubuntu LTS program being 5 years, and I'm not really convinced that that's like a one-to-one comparison. Like having been like handling this, version 4 is getting further and further away from like our upstream. And doing an active LTS over that time is just like, it's getting harder and harder to keep up. And as we have more and more versions, I just like don't see us having the bandwidth to be able to manage it that long.
Yeah, I'm certainly not advocating for that. What I'm saying is let's not shorten our current active LTS cycle right now.
Absolutely. One thing that I do think we could consider, though, which is maybe like a halfway, there is like maybe we can do something along the lines of like during the maintenance period, we can have a little more leeway as to what we consider like major breaking bugs that can do a backport, especially if people are willing to do it. So, for example, if we hear that some vendor or individual is floating something because they need to for their releases, then maybe like we consider like rolling that into, some sort of patch release in the maintenance period.
Not if it's breaking, unless it's security, that's for sure. Not for breaking changes.
I mean only changes that would normally have come in the active LTS period.
So I couldn't actually just find it now. Where's the documentation for what we can actually do? Oh, there, I see. When it moves into maintenance mode, only critical bugs, critical security fixes, documentation updates will be permitted. I mean, we could probably just allow regular bug fixes in maintenance mode, to be honest.
I think the challenge with that is mostly around the release itself, right? Like, how often are we doing releases when it's in maintenance? Because we're not planning on doing consistent and ongoing releases monthly the way we've been doing for active is one. B, the thing would be like as things are landing, like, so if we have a bunch of things that people are backporting, when do we decide to cut that release? And if we have a security release that comes out, like, does that stuff get rolled in? It leaves a lot of things that are kind of ambiguous that I think we would prefer it not to be. But yeah, I don't really have an answer on that.
Right. I mean, so we could also say that it will only like regularly, unless there's like I don't know how you'd say this exactly, but like we could have it where under normal circumstances where there's basically no one's really asking for it, we would only do critical bugs and critical security fixes. But then if there's like a specific vendor or something, or a bunch of people are like, hey, we really need like this fixed, that we would still be like, okay, yeah, we can do that since it's not breaking, et cetera, in maintenance mode. That seems like a plausible thing that we could do to me.
I think if somebody's willing to do the backporting, if they've gone through the trouble of actually doing it, then we can say, okay, we can get this landed. We may not cut a release for another month or two, but we can land this. I think the critical difference between active and maintenance needs to be whether core itself, people in core itself, are actively backporting issues, backporting PRs, right? If somebody comes along and does it on their own, I mean, even if after a line goes end of life, like if somebody really wanted to come back on version 5 and say, I have a fix for version 5, I wouldn't have a problem with people landing stuff. It just doesn't necessarily mean we're going to cut a release.
Yeah, we're not gonna build it. Yeah, I mean, landing it. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we would really want to do feature additions in maintenance.
Right.
I guess the challenge there, though, is like if we land it, what do we land it on staging? Do we land it into like the 5.x line? Because like as we have it right now, we only really put things into the .x branch when we've cut a release with it. So throwing something on staging, I guess, would be useful in the fact that people could use that to pin their build.
I'd say that that's what we do. I mean, if people want to land those things, as long as it's not a new feature, it is a December patch. We'll land it in staging, but there won't be a commitment to if and when we'll actually cut a release.
So one challenge that I can easily see with that is a challenge that we've seen happening over in V8 land. We haven't really hit it thoroughly right now. But one example is like losing our ability to test stuff. So for example, Canary in the Goldmine right now is in the midst of a bit of a rewrite towards 2.0 using ES6 language features, which would mean that we're no longer able to support 10 and 12. So like we're not going to be able to properly test them. I can easily imagine, as 4 and 6 become end of life, async await would likely become, like a standard within things that we're doing, and all of a sudden our testing infrastructure may no longer be even able to test it. So I'm a little concerned with like making a commitment to being able to do that if we lose our ability to test the stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm okay on non-end-of-life releases. Once you get to those, then you run into those issues, right?
Yeah, I think we should have probably avoid that in our testing infrastructure until releases go end of life. But past that, I mean, really, you can just use an old version of the test suites and just shrug. I mean, like...
No, but if our infrastructure itself doesn't even work, we could find ourselves in a weird place.
So they have no way of validating that the PR actually works.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess what's the value of us taking it to that old repo versus...
I mean, yeah, okay, so...
I don't really see the value in it going on staging if we're not willing to do a release, is kind of like how I'm feeling on it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, they'll have, like, once you get to there, anyone that really wants that stuff still is going to have to build it themselves anyways.
The only benefit, perhaps, is it gives legitimacy, but since we won't necessarily be able to test it or want to test it or put any effort into it, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do.
Well, like, what point is there in having that level of legitimacy anymore anyways? Like, I mean,
I don't know, like somebody, that's the only thing I can think of why somebody might want it there versus...
Right now, I'm reading through them. They just came out that...
Sorry, say that again?
don't think that. I think that was an ad or something.
Oh, okay, sure.
Sorry, that was on my end.
Okay.
Get off Twitter, James.
No, it just I clicked on a link and it just started talking. So
Yeah, okay.
So I have another question that relates to the actual issue, which is if we should swap LTS and maintenance timeframes or stuff along the lines of changing the active LTS timeframe. And that pretty much comes down to original thoughts on this was, and that's, I mean, I don't think anyone really planned for active LTS to even be as active as it is today.
yeah.
So if we just like don't backport certain things, I don't really, unless they're like requested for, I don't actually see that as a huge problem if we're running low on like people resources to do it.
Totally. I think the solution
I mean,
is.
it's not a perfect solution, but you know.
I think the easiest solution to this is just if people are willing to do the work to backport to lines that we're still doing releases on, and what they're looking to land like is not going to cause, like in the same way that we look at miners, like if someone wants to land something that's Semper patch, that's not causing major problems, that's legitimately going to like solve an issue, I think we should consider it in maintenance mode. But like that is it. Like we shouldn't be doing active work on backporting more stuff, but we shouldn't like stop things from landing if they have a meaning to be there. The only issue that I see with that is that the only time that we really release maintenance releases, if we look at how we did it on 10 and 12, were like when there were major security issues or things that we needed to fix. And when we're doing that, we want to keep the delta as small as possible.
So I don't think looking at 10 and 12 for this is, well, maybe sort of 12, but I mean 12 was a long way behind V4. So I honestly don't really think that's quite a realistic comparison, especially for
How about it just with
like most
today?
of the code in those code bases was like years older than the rest of like V4 and stuff. So I think the delta by that time, not even necessarily by their actual release time, well, not by 0.12's release time, but certainly by 0.10's was farther than anything we're actually going to be seeing. Like I don't think that's quite going to be the case. And I mean, if it really is because of like release help, I mean that's something I can definitely help do too if necessary.
I think the problem's a little tangential to that though. Like if we have an OpenSSL security release that we need to do, we're not including any other code in there. If we find like a major bug in like HTTP or something, as an example, and we decide to patch that, we again like want to minimize the delta. So we don't want to be like including all these other like backlogged commits. So like the question then becomes like if we're gonna start allowing people to like send us PRs for non-critical changes that we're considering and we'll put onto staging for a future release, like when or what is that future release? Do we just assume that like when we hit a certain backlog that we'll cut a release with it, or that like when we hit a certain quota we will? And then like what do we also do when we have like that stuff in staging and we have to do a security release and now all of a sudden the stuff that's been sitting in staging is in conflict? It's just, it seems odd to me to accept those if we don't have a clear path to when they come out in a release.
We definitely, there should be some expectation.
Look at what's there or something. That would seem reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if there's conflicts then from like an OpenSSL bump, I mean that's just, I think, something we've got to accept. And if no one steps up to redo the work for that, potentially it might need to be dropped in the future. I think that's just.
Yeah, I think it's clear that the work, if somebody's requesting a particular PR go in, they're going to have to do whatever work it takes to keep it. But it is a good question as to okay, they've done that. There's probably not going to be any regular release that, at least the current history has been, we won't be doing like a release every month for those to get out in. So when will those changes go out?
And then further, and like this is the thing that starts to get weird. So someone sends us a pull request and then is basing their releases off of that patch, waiting for it to come out on a release. Then we do a security release. The patch, changes, has a new SHA. Like, I don't know. It just seems like inconsistent to me is the only issue.
I think that question is the same, right? Like we have things in staging, they don't go out, but it's.
But if someone,
so I guess the question then is like, is there that big of a compelling argument when we've had essentially what's going to be like the same patch or at least the same part of the patch in probably most cases, that we can't do that in like a regular release that comes out as a security critical bug fix or whatever. Like,
I don't think we want to muddy that. Like I think our security releases should just be the delta of the security patch.
Yeah.
So, and then when we start to look at this and unwind it, it kind of comes down to the original reason why we moved from active to maintenance in the first place. And it's just like at a certain point, like we kind of need to say we're not actively landing things on here anymore. It will be only critical changes and only changes that are so critical that we'll immediately be cutting a release out of it. So it almost leaves me like kind of full circle to, well, maybe at the point that we move to maintenance, that's just it. And if things aren't critical, it's not going to land. And, it's time to look at upgrading if you want to get these things that aren't on that release. And in reality, when we're a year out from something being end of life, if people don't have the infrastructure to be floating patches and doing their own builds, they probably should be looking at upgrading if there's things that they really need.
I guess the other thing would be if there was some way, if people could volunteer to do the releases as well, then it would sort of be easier to say, okay, yeah, you can volunteer to, make the PRs and you can also volunteer to do the releases, but that's not so easy, is it?
Doing the releases aren't even like that much of a time sink. It's more just like our LTS program is slowly getting closer and closer to having, consistent releases and having an actual release schedule. And when we cut 8 into LTS, I want to even make like an actual schedule for the miners. So if we have like a set schedule for the entire lifetime of the LTS, then like the only thing that we want to think is like, well, maybe during maintenance, it's 12 months, maybe like once a quarter, there's a maintenance release that comes out.
Yeah, if there's something in the backlog, you could do it once a quarter would be reasonable.
So I have a question to pose then. So we say that once it moves into maintenance mode, only critical bugs, security fixes, and documentation updates will be permitted. So under that, I wonder if something is that important that someone is doing the work to get it there into that maintenance mode branch, is that a critical bug fix?
Well, it may be critical to them, but it doesn't mean it's critical to everybody, right? I guess is the.
So I'm gonna throw this out there that maybe we should move some of this discussion to a thread and open a new issue to discuss it. My gut is telling me that like we need to set an LTS schedule that's a little bit more in depth than what we have right now, which like specifically outlines when you should expect releases, which is in an active line on a monthly basis. Potentially like even lock in the schedule for miners a lot stronger, which would be, I would say it would be nice to do like once a quarter on that or something like that. So people know exactly how many releases to expect, exactly when to expect miner releases. And if we want to be doing like a quarterly backlog on maintenance, if it's there, that could be what it would look like. And if we have all of that like lined up, we could forecast, the entire release line for that version and stick to it. through the lifetime of that LTS.
So I think most of that's a good idea. I think that we should not enforce that the minor bumps have to happen. I think that if there are no compelling Semver minors, that we should not do the minor bump.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The only reason I would want to make the minor more consistent time-wise is that we want to do a longer RC on the minor. And so what we saw happen with the last one was that by making the minor and doing a month-long RC instead of a 2-week RC, it shifted the rest of the schedule. So I would just want to see a schedule that already accounts for the minor,
right,
and accounts for the time for that RC. And even if we choose not to do it, it's at least not going to offset the rest of the schedule.
Right. Yeah. I understand. Yeah. I think that setting, times when we would consider looking at doing that is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I definitely like setting out, like you could almost say here the schedule for the whole release, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, scheduling in the minors at a certain interval and scheduling in even once you're in maintenance, right? Setting that all out would be, I think, a good thing. So, and I agree, pulling it out to another issue. Who are we going to assign to open that issue?
I'm more than happy to take the lead on this and to even come up with a spec for what this release process would look like. I'm technically on vacation this week, so I probably won't get to it until next week.
We'll include.
If someone else wants to take a lead on it this week, please feel free.
I'll tag. Okay. So I captured his next actions on this one. So we're going to leave active maintenance as is for now, which is what was the original discussion. And then the other point for next action is open a new issue to better define release schedule. This might include one release a quarter once in maintenance. For schedule minors, might just be where it would be if the minor is needed. And Miles will take the action to open the issue. It will include proposed release schedule. Schedule template, maybe. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, so then our next item is managing of floating V8 patches. Now, okay, go ahead.
This has mostly been under control. As it is right now, Ali made a really great guide that's landed in master as far as I know, although it might still be sitting to be reviewed. Let me double check that. But Ali has a guide for backporting V8 stuff right now. I do know that there is still, yeah, I think that's landed. There's still a little bit more work that needs to be done on their end as far as bandwidth for actually having people to manage and audit their backport list. Although the backport list over at V8 is substantially smaller. As far as I know, it's about 20 commits right now that need to be reviewed. But the review that those need is much more substantial than the review that we need for the stuff on core. So it takes a lot more time. Ali is the primary person running that right now. The only thing that didn't end up getting solved in this issue, which I'd be interested in seeing more research done into, would be how we're managing V8 itself, because we're still just floating the patches on our own tree. And so we had discussion about whether or not it would make sense to have, the V8, like a Node.js /V8 tree that the patches are pulled against instead, and that we had some sort of tool for updating the tree, or maybe it's a Git subtree. That wasn't entirely set in stone. But I do think that there's still room for improvement in the entire project, but I don't know that this is explicitly an LTS issue.
Yeah, I thought they actually created a V. Yeah, there is a Node.js V8, right?
There is, and there's still stuff that's being done in there, and there's also a V8 node, which is where the last known good release version that has an up-to-date, head of V8 embedded in Node exists. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm saying I think this is a bigger issue, just more about and it may even just be bigger than V8. It may just be how are we vending code into the repo in general. That's something that might be able to be explored, but what we have right now works enough. I just think there's room for improvement.
Right. So are we not using the Node.js V8 as the staging ground? Is that what you're saying?
I do not believe so. I believe the pull requests are still directly coming against the branches.
Okay.
And I think that works for the way we have the process right now too. Like, we don't need an unnecessary, like an extra stage of indirection,
Right.
as it is, unless we had some sort of tooling or something in place that could automate the process of updating our tree.
So yeah, that makes sense until there's, and I think, so the question is 11, is that one, should it be closed or is there still a next action on it?
I think that we can close this for now, to be honest. Yeah, because actually, you know what? Let's ping Ali and see how he feels.
He's got the to-do, right? I'm just looking at the end of it.
I just pinged him in the issue, and I think that was
ping him, and then let's take it off. Does it need to be on our agenda until there's more discussion?
I don't think so. I think we could take it off the agenda for now.
LTS agenda. I will remove that if I can. Okay. Okay, so then on to the next issue on our thing, which was a backporting work group. So does anybody want to, I think, Miles, you made the initial suggestion, right? Do you want to take it in terms of an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So there's an open issue right now. Let me see if I can find it. So there's an open issue on the main repo, 11.099. And in 11.099, it's a pull request to add a guide for backporting PRs. And so, this started with Evan, and it was a really great idea on his part to just kind of try to codify some of the process that we have before backporting, right now for backporting. And the issues started to, get some legs and started to have more and more people posting in comments. And it started to get to the point where a new process was being developed inside of the issue, specifically around metadata that should be included. But, overall, it was just starting to roll into something a little bit larger than just documenting the process that we're doing right now. At the same time, too, our backporting process involves labeling, and I've started to have some serious thoughts around our current labeling process, specifically around, LTS watch, whether or not it's useful, whether or not we need labels, because the LTS watch label originally was made so that people would put that label on commits to be considered to be backported. Then we would go through and audit the ones that had those labels and then backport them. And when James was originally doing this work, we actually were only backporting things that had that label, and we were not doing active work to audit the commits that had not yet actually been labeled. The problem that we started to notice was that, very simply, people were not consistently labeling. We were finding ourselves in a place where a lot of stuff was not getting backported. So I took it upon myself to start using branch diff and doing large batch audits of all of the commits that have landed into current that had not yet been reviewed. And so for context and an example, last week there were 550 commits on 7x that had not yet been audited for version 6 or version 4. So we've gone through, and I started doing it in a 2-part phase where I would go and audit the things that had not yet been labeled, and then I would go through on the GitHub UI and audit the things that had been labeled. And I started to realize that that process was like a little bit convoluted and did not actually really save too much time, and that we may as well just like audit everything at once with or without labels. And it ended up taking a bit like less time to do that because it was cleaner to do it using the generated markdown than it was to use the GitHub UI. And the GitHub UI wasn't actually really giving us much of a benefit. And so what it turns out is what, like, to me right now, it's almost more meaningful for us to have a label that we can put on things that we're considering to backport that are blocked for some reason, so that we can filter those out of the larger audit, than it is to like have labels to know things that should be audited. So anyways, I got a little bit too, like, more in depth than we needed for this discussion on it. But the reason I bring this up is, and the reason why I brought up the issue to begin with, is we have a thread with now over 120 commits of people who are trying to like decide the process, who haven't been actively doing the process and haven't been putting the time in. And so the main purpose of this new issue that was open was I would like to spin out a backporting working group. And in that working group, I would like to have people decide on a new process, both including the labeling process, the documenting of how backports should be done, as well as like the actual backporting itself. And I would like the people who are designing that process to be committing to putting in a certain number of hours a month into supporting the backporting. Now, this is something that doesn't really scale horizontally super well. James and I, for example, paired on backporting last week, but we're doing it in a way where we're actually like in constant communication about, hey, you know, what have we audited so far? Who's currently on top of things? And so I think that we need to get together a backporting team, and that team needs to be in communication about who's backporting and when they're backporting. Maybe it involves certain people taking on the audit for certain releases and handing off, you know, I'm not entirely sure that process, but I essentially want to get a group of people who are all willing to donate at least, you know, 10 hours a month to 15 hours a month to working on this problem. And essentially only those people who are willing to put in that time should be the people who are coming up with this process. So, you know, a little long-winded, but that's the high-level idea of this issue.
Right. I think that, you know, I guess it's like maybe you'd still want some input from other people, but I certainly agree that the people who are going to actually do the work should have the primary contribution to what's there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, like, I mean, I'm definitely taking a hard line on this, and it was, you know, it may even mostly be kind of a personal thing of, you know, I'm the one who's been doing most of this work, and then seeing people come in and like try to define it without having done the work kind of, you know, didn't seem the most intuitive. So I'm still open to other opinions, but like what I would like to see first is like an iteration of the people who are committing the time, and then bringing it back to review of the project.
Right. So in the current state, like, you know, I think what would be nice is that thing that originally one lands just the way it is, right? And then move on from there. Is it well past that, or is that still a possibility for that PR?
So the PR as it is right now does need an update to the text before it would be be ready to land.
Okay.
I'm also like, I'd have to review it, but like it says to look at the backporting line. It talks about the staging branches, talks about you know, the difference between cherry porting and backporting. But I mean, to be completely honest, I almost feel like this pull request could be closed. The document itself, the current state of it could be saved and put into a more collaborative document than a pull request, and we should like get that to a state where everyone who's on, you know, this backporting team and wants to do the work is willing to sign off on it, and then it should come back as a pull request. Because I'm just not convinced that it adds that much extra value without people committing to it. I think the number.
Some of the interesting part though was, I thought in this one was like, okay, my thing doesn't land, and I'm asked to do the backport.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, there's a certain amount of words. How do I do this?
But even that, in the steps that were being suggested in there was like still kind of like discussion over what was the best way to handle a cherry pick or the best way to like update the commit. I'm not sure. I'd have to review it again. I don't know if Colin has updated it since the last review that I did, but there were like still a handful of like things that needed to be updated for it to be able to land.
Yeah, because it seems useful to me that, like, you know, you give, I know at least the part I commented on, it was around that part. It's like, yeah, okay, it didn't cherry pick, so, you know, because those ones, you know, this work group would do, but for the ones where you then go back and say, hey, can you do it for us? Some guidance on that is useful, I think. Okay,
so the one of the main things, and maybe we just can have some guidance in there with going too far into it. The metadata, as well as like what we want to do with the original commit message.
Yep.
I think that needs to be solidified.
Yes. Before
we tell people. And so it's kind of like, yes, it's useful to tell people how to handle a cherry pick that's not landing cleanly. On the same note, that's like kind of a little bit of just like generic git foo. It's like good to have in there as a reference. But I'm on the fence if it's useful to have it in there until we've like entirely solidified it. My gut is telling me right now, and it's not necessarily 100%, but my gut is telling me that we probably should make a consistent backport process to Node in general. That's the same for backporting V8 as it is for backporting Node commits to a certain extent. As far as like specifically around how we preserve the original commit message and add new commit messages. Because we started to talk in that issue around like, you know, maybe we should add like an original PR URL versus a PR URL. And that's starting to lead me to feel like, hey, you know, if we need to make a backport, like maybe we should just be doing exactly what we're doing in V8, which is like locking that original PR message and then having the new PR URL in there for like the actual backport PR. But again, like I think that's something we should discuss in the issue.
Like what would happen? I just come back to like what would happen today. So if people are doing this, you're going to get a variety of things. You could at least write down what. I mean, I agree that I guess the problem is that there's no agreement on what we would tell people to do today, right?
Yeah.
That's basically the problem. And like the second that we start to try to solidify part of it, even if it's just like the process as to how you should cherry pick, like we need to give them guidance on on what to do with the commit message. And I don't want to commit to something right now that's like half baked.
So, but in the meantime, we'll get whatever, right? Depending on who does it.
But like as it is right now, like we just tell people keep the original commit message is like literally the only guidance. And I mean, maybe that's something that we can take this document and fix that. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions. I mean, the doc
could just, I mean, if that's the only thing we could agree with, the first version of the doc could just say that, right? Because I don't like this doesn't have a whole lot about tagging and stuff, does it?
I'm taking a look again right now. So it says what needs to be backported, what can be backported, how to submit a backport. And this gets down to like how to actually, but there's things in here that are like, for example, like it's saying to do a git pull R upstream. Like I never do that for doing the backports. That's not the way in which I would do a backport. They're like having here like comments on how to resolve problems. And that includes like references to making a backport of origin PRL. It's like adding new process in there. So like, I don't know where to draw the line as to like what we tell people to do versus what we don't tell them to do. And I'm actually now like the only thing I'm seeing in here that is kind of useful is like telling people how to do a cherry pick. But aside from that, like a lot of the guidance in here is along like how to do the message and like what the message is. And that's one of the things that I think needs to be decided upon by this group.
So I have some input, and that basically boils down to that this document, I suppose, was supposed to cover all release branches, but I think if we have an LTS working group subset, that is probably, we probably want to keep the current release line at least somewhat separated. It will probably use some version of updated metadata if we do that at some point, but I don't think all of the process should be necessarily dictated the same as how we do LTS.
I disagree with that, to be honest. And I think that like the release process between the two should be the same. And we're slowly getting towards that coalescence aside from like what commits should land. Like as far as like what we're talking about, we're saying like if you make a backport PR, the metadata in that PR should be done a certain way. And I don't see any difference in that between LTS and current. And to be honest, like when I was originally suggesting this group, I said that it may not be LTS or it could be LTS. It could be part of release, right? Like it could be a subset of the release group as well. The only reason it started to get somewhat convoluted about it was that we started talking about like it actually being people who are stepping out to help with the backporting for LTS. But as far as like the process for backporting a PR and like what metadata should and shouldn't be included in that, I think it starts to get really weird if we're having like a different process for current than LTS.
Yeah, but I mean like the labeling and sorting process that we might end up having for LTS, I think would be definitely unnecessary for current.
Absolutely. But that's
So
kind of tangential to the problems with the document right now.
Well, it is sort of. I just want to make sure we don't end up moving that onto into current. And also, I think probably leeway should be and always hopefully will be higher for just pretty much anyone moving a commit into current compared to LTS. I don't really think that should change too much, and I'd kind of like to make sure that doesn't change. I mean, maybe I can be a part of the process to help.
And I don't see it changing. Like literally the only thing that I see that this would change for current is the same thing it would change for LTS, which is like, what is our standard for a commit message on a backport? And that's it.
Yeah.
And that was something that we saw in some of the previous releases were like inconsistent and caused problems already.
Yeah.
So like that's the only thing, because like we're not doing a constant audit of things for backporting to current. So like any of the labeling stuff would not really, make much sense.
Right. I mean, I understand that it's probably not going to be a problem, but I want to make sure that this group, especially if it's mainly run by LTS people, does not end up overly changing. Having this process maybe in the main repo is dictated by people who are not doing LTS enough to,
Mm-hmm. And I think that would probably mostly become like this document should specifically be about the process of how to backport a PR.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is separate from the process of auditing the backports, and that can be another document.
Agreed. Like I think this one, as I read it, it's purely about, hey, you've been asked to do a backport, not necessarily the group that comes together to make sure all the backports take place.
I mean, I think that'll be an ongoing concern that I have, but I think that backporting working groups seems like a reasonable thing to do to try to sort this sort of thing out. It will need, of course, sign off from core once it does develop something, but I think that is probably fine.
And I think that was the high level. It's like the people who are going to be doing much more of this work and more in-depth parts of this work are going to be the people who are auditing. So I'd like to see the document like solidified and signed off by that group, and then like hand it over to core and say, hey, do you agree to this being the way that we do things?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, like the amount of information and sort of ways we could do stuff and choices we can make is a little bit overbearing, certainly for one pull request. So I think we should definitely try to at least move that to a larger group. Whether it needs to be its own repo or not, I don't really know, but definitely needs to be moved out of one pull request.
Is the only thing in here, I mean, the one thing is the PR metadata. Are there other specific things in here that are contentious?
So the steps that they have for like git pull are upstream v7x staging, how to update the branches and branch off of them and stuff.
I don't use git pull either.
I don't use git pull. I would do a git reset against staging myself or rebase.
So is it just that there's many ways to do it and not this one is one and there's others that are equally as good, or?
Well, I just like never use pull ever. And it can lead your repo into like kind of a poor state if there's any conflicts.
Yeah. What is this for what is that actually for? Is that just for updating the branch?
That's like if you want to submit a backport to a staging branch, here are the steps to like branch off the staging branch and create a new branch. And update the staging branch.
That's just like updating a regular branch, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I don't know why you wouldn't, under most circumstances, fast forward if you could, and if you can't, just reset. That seems like a more reliable and cleaner way to do it.
Well, and that's why
then we're just like discussing, I don't know, details of this. So we probably just need a better place to do it.
Yeah, and that was part of like kind of what I was saying with this document is that like in its current state, I don't really see it being incredibly useful for people. And like the only kernels of information in here that's like useful and consistent is like how to make a new branch and how to cherry pick, which I don't think like we need to like land the document early in order to get that information in there for people. Because what people really care about, and I know that this was like Sam's main complaint, or like Sam's main thing that drove him here, was like consistent information about the message and about like what should be backported and how.
Yeah, I think Sam's concern is being able to predict whether, you know, I've committed a PR. How do I know if it's going to be backported and when? This doc, I don't think, had anything to do with that. This was just sort of to give people a, hey, you have to do your backport. Here's some guidance. Not necessarily the way you have to do it, but the way you know you can do it.
I mean, I still think something like that's useful. I particularly think that it's useful to better lay out how our releases work in terms of branches. That might not be readily apparent, so.
But that's also not necessarily like the purpose of this guide.
Correct.
I think it was so that you had enough insight into that.
Yeah,
I mean, the fact that there's a staging and you're going to be, you know, making a pull against staging as opposed to the main repo, because that's not obvious, right?
But it's also not like if someone makes a pull against the wrong branch, we now can update to staging, and it's like I think the number one thing that we really want to like let people know, truthfully, if you're backporting, like make your branch pushable to the project, and then like we can for the most part fix any problems that arise. I think that a lot of what we're discussing now can get pushed back. If people are like, I think mostly what I wanted to know from this group is that if everyone's on board with the idea of having this kind of like backport group, and if any of you are willing to, you know, donate some time towards it, or people from your organization to donate times towards it. Because as it is right now, you know, it's not good that I'm the only person who's handling this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we need to work out a process with stakeholders who are going to do it so that we know how we can distribute this workload properly.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to speak for Gibson, but maybe I will. That like but among Gibson, Sam, myself, you know, we'll be looking to find at least one of us who's involved in this process.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to continue to be involved with it as well. So.
And Jeremiah, is there anyone from NodeSource that might have some time to donate to this?
Perhaps. That would probably be myself, but I'm not going to guarantee it at this point.
That's fair. The one thing I do think that's worth throwing out on this as well, to people at different organizations, or if anyone's listening, and maybe we can do a call outwards as well. This is like a really great place to come in and learn more about the project. So like Jeremiah, someone that comes to mind for me on this is like Tierney, for example. If like Tierney wants to get more involved in the project and have like a good place where he can learn about how everything's working, this is a really great place where you can jump in and like really level up your understanding of how the project works.
One quick question. Do we think work group or team?
I think team.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, team. We're not even chartered as a work group yet.
Yeah, okay. So we'll make it a team. I just wanted to clarify that. That makes sense to me. And that doesn't really require chartering even, right? Like we could form a team of interested people, create the team in GitHub, then they're, you know, we can do @copies, and you know, I think that makes sense. And I think so it's a matter of how do we, you know, what are the next steps in terms of getting that team going?
Well, the first next step is having volunteers. We can't do anything until people volunteer. And we need, in my opinion, at least 4 volunteers before we can really spin it up.
I heard Gibson, was that right too?
Yep.
Okay. And we could talk to Sam.
If it's Gibson, Sam, myself, and James, I think that is a good place to start, and we can create a meeting. I would like to see, some more people involved, but maybe starting with 4 people is a good place to start so that we're not stepping on each other's toes too much.
Well, I think it would be good to pull out, like send a call. Like it's probably a good time to ask people if they're interested, right? Or do you? Yeah, you could go 2 ways. You could say you want to get started with a smaller group, lay some groundwork, or you could say, yeah, let's make a larger call and see who steps up.
Yeah, I do think like there is a bit of a catch-22 in that we want more people, and it's a great place to level up. But at the same point, and this is like something James and I have discussed in depth, if we do not trust the work of the person who's doing it, or if that person's work then needs to be audited,
right,
then it doesn't actually save any time.
No, yeah, clearly. So you want to stay? I'm just trying to figure. Do you want to start with a smaller group and then, you know, basically say, okay, once that's in place, then it's easier to try and pull people in versus pulling a whole bunch of people in at the same time. That's certainly true.
Yeah, if it's Gibson, Sam, myself, and James, and each of us are willing to donate at least 10 hours a month, and at most, let's call it 15 to start, I think that that is more than enough to get all of this work done and distribute the workload.
So that's just over a month, an hour, a day a month, right?
Yeah.
Total distributed between everyone.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, yeah.
a day a month of work, yes.
A day a month per person, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we may need a little bit more than that, but I would say at least for the people who are coming to help out, if I could have 3 extra days where I'm not doing stuff a month, I'm completely confident that we can keep up our release schedule that we've got going on right now.
Okay, so yeah, Sam's away, but I'll talk to him and see if we can swing that. Even if I don't know, I know if you split it up among too many people, like if it was half me, half him. But anyway, we'll see what we can do.
Okay.
Are there any other good, like, are there any other people out there that you think would be good to pull in to start with?
I'm gonna have to go ahead and drop off, so I will catch up with y'all later.
I feel good about this group, to be honest, because yeah, that seems good to me. As long as Sam's on board, that works for me.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, he's on vacation this week. We're actually both at Devox next week, so we won't be able to get back to you for a couple of weeks. But I think he certainly was interested in making this process more deterministic and predictable. And we discussed that. Well, we have to be involved to do that. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm technically on vacation this week, and I'm at TC39 next week. So That works for me as well, like timing of like the following week after that.
Okay. So yeah, why don't we plan to hook back up then? And
if we can, maybe we can use next week to arrange a time in the following week to actually meet.
yeah, over email or something like that.
Yeah.
Who do you want to take the action for that?
I can take the lead on that.
Miles will send out email. Okay. You maybe just copy me so that I can give Sam a heads up if he's asking what it is.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so that's good. Those, I think, was everything we had on the agenda, right?
I believe so.
Okay. So I guess we could go and, for the people watching, let me see. I see 3 viewers. If you want to you could post questions into the issue. Let me go back to that. Or is anybody on the dev channel, the RC channel? No? Okay, let me see if I'll flip over there. We'll just see if...
See some comments from Destroyer of Build about the LTS schedule we were talking about.
Okay, in the issue itself or...
in the build channel, it was mostly just
okay.
saying the LTS schedules would be great and that the RCs are helpful, but we should raise more awareness of them.
Okay, so that's basically not a question, but that's good feedback. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get lots of positive feedback to here's an insight into what's going on. Okay, let me just check the issue, see if anybody posted anything in there. I don't see anything in there. Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, I guess we'll call the meeting for today. And I guess that if we're both next week, we're both busy. Is it the next 2 weeks? No, we wanted to get it. It'll be not next week, but the week after that we'll get back together. So a week before the next regular LTS meeting.
I'll follow up with an email next week.
Okay, sounds perfect.
Cool. Talk to you soon.
Great. Talk to you guys all later. Bye.